How about rivals? Back in, this is the pre-17, right? So you look back at the 21, whether it was a mods, a wing mods, the hobby stock, which is super stocks. Who would you say your biggest rivals were?
Well, through that era, it was probably, Nesbitt.
Nesbitt?
Yeah, Tommy, certainly a Hall of Famer himself, and he raced everywhere. Of course, it was his living. It's what he did for a living. I never did that. I still worked a full-time job, but he was one, and like Phil Prusak. One of the races that I had, it was in, I went up to Red Cedar Speedway, or not Red Cedar, sorry, it was the Red Clay Classic up in Ashland. And my brother sent me up there, I believe, with the car that he owned, and I was racing, and I beat Phil Prusak. And I thought, when I beat Phil Prusak, I think I'm coming around in this sport a little bit. I didn't win the race, but I had less equipment, and I got up through there, and I beat him. And I thought, okay, now I can focus on. In any sport, confidence is huge. I mean, you certainly have to have good equipment, but confidence is huge. And that gained a lot of confidence, and just kind of projected from there. Other big names in that era, like Dino said, Dino was no slouch in them days either.
No, I was nothing. You got to talk about Leon Plank or let's see, we got actually there's. Well, your big brother's one of them for sure. He's right in there.
Yeah, well, and he had Brent Larson too. Brent Larson, the old tube one, which is
Tom Steiding.
Yep, Tom Steiding was in there.
Tough competitor.
I remember Don Berger, but he just raced at Menominee. He was always
67.
67, yeah. And then I don't know, Jerry Radetsky. But now we're getting into the older times when them guys were coming up through. Probably the 80s more with like Radetsky and then Mars in the 90s, of course, he started in. But I'm drawing a little blank here in the.
Well, Pat Dorr was a young guy, but but he's still fast today, and that's what's kind of fun too. Is you still get to see guys like Lance Mathis or Kanta, and these older guys still running. It's like, if I had money, would I still be running? Maybe not, maybe, but.
We feel like quitters.
Well, you just brought that up. We got Lance. He was always in there, and he came up from Winona. And then Carl Finsky too. He's passed away, and he was always a tough competitor. There's a few guys that I'll always say can manhandle race cars. It didn't matter in them days if the cars worked or not. But I'd say my brother was one, Lance was one, and probably Carl was another one. Them guys could make anything work
on any track, because that Tri-Oval Speedway down there was unique. Did you ever race at the Tri-Oval?
I did once, yeah. And Craig and I went down there, and I think they cut the payoff, so we did well, but then I think that was the end of that because he just didn't like it. No, I was actually with Bob, and then we went down there with Craig, and they cut the payoff, and he said, "Nope, I ain't racing." We loaded up and went home.
Right. Because he got $200 instead of $225. Yeah. And for Geller, $25, $25.
Yeah.
We're not coming back here.
Well, absolutely. That culture seemed to change, and you talked a little bit. Let's shift gears to that. You said it wasn't just at the racetrack. I mean, the post-race culture was incredible. I mean, I remember people sticking around half the night and drinking beer, lots of stories maybe we don't need for here, right? But there was a lot that went on, and everybody, stuck around. But you said it was even more than that. You guys did stuff away from the track.
Well, like you said, everybody, we even had deals where everybody did like a potluck thing after the races, and you had these big feasts afterwards, and it was unbelievable what you ate for food, and that happened every Saturday night. And quite frankly, after that, then you went to the bar after that. So it's like, man, but races got over at 10:32 probably, and they started at sundown because they couldn't keep the tracks wet. But, getting back to the culture of outside of the racetrack, we had, like Dino had Halloween costume parties, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we even floated down the Apple River, Ron Jones, you and I, and girlfriends and wives and dates and whatever. But, and that was before cell phones and how to network. Now it's easier to get together and do things like that, but we accomplished it.
Well, we played baseball. We did hockey. Like I was telling Ryan earlier, we had an NHL player playing hockey. Was an NHL. Tom Sundberg was on my modified team, and And he played hockey with us and made us all look silly, and made us feel good about getting out there and trying it. It was a lot of fun. So, and we did all kinds of stuff like that in the old days.
You know what's crazy is you mentioned it's easier, right, to do that because cell phones and connecting. Yeah. But I think even though it's easier, it's harder. Like nobody does it. Mm-hmm. It's not even a thing anymore. I mean, the street stock tour, and Mason's familiar with that. That group of guys kind of melds a little bit like that, but you don't really see that in all of racing. So do you think that's a reason why racing was, as far as you look at the fan count, the car count, do you think it was bigger through that era, through the 90s, because of that culture?
Well, you can speak to this too, Dino, but what I think is man, that's all there was to do. I mean, you had, you didn't have 500 channels of cable, or maybe that was just starting to come on, but you didn't have that, and like you say, how the heck we organize these things is beyond me.
I don't know.
I mean, because you didn't have cell phones and all that stuff, so that was a logistical thing in itself, how everybody got together. I mean, it was just something like somebody put it out there, be here at this time, bring your baseball glove, bring your hockey skates, and that's what we did, and everybody just showed up. So that part was kind of fun, and that's how we organized. But so you found somebody that might be working in a garage, you'd stick your nose in there. I mean, that's how we got half our pit crew. There'd be kids kind of wandering by back and forth with their bikes. They were interested to see what we were doing in the garage, and we'd invite them in and say, come on in, we can teach you something here. Early on, I swear my dad was one of the big instigators in that, in having kids come in the garage. That's why in our neighborhood alone there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 race cars within about 4-block area, and I believe a lot of that was the fact that my dad brought them into the garage when he saw them looking like they were interested, and made them feel comfortable, and said, okay, you can start scraping mud, here you go, or wash these parts that you'd wash in gasoline.
right. I remember them days.
It's like, holy smokes, and that type of thing. So, it's all fun stuff that just kind of built up that camaraderie that you had.
And that could still happen today, right?
It could.
So racers, if you're watching this, do that. Keep your garage door open. Invite the kids in, because kids still, even though they're on their phones all the time, they still like to be hands-on. They still like to do stuff. They still like to be part of things. So I think that's a good nugget. And you don't really see as much of that. And I think that's something that could really help the sport. For sure. And you have, an amazing storied career. But is there a race or two that you lost, maybe a second, that just grinds
right away,
you?
Yes.
What do you got?
Well, one of the races that just haunts me, and it's both at the same speedway. My worst wreck was there, and probably the race that haunts me the most is that I was out there and I started, I think on the outside pole with Gelling. Was that his name? Gelling? Number 18. And
Dakota Rumble.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that was the 10,000 to win show, which was big money. It was later in my career, but I was racing for Craig at the time and got out there, and I guess we had, just from reading the internet, that Leah sent me some stuff, and one of the questions was a person about that race says, what happened, because you guys were dicing it out pretty good and get the thing going, and he was trying to slide me and do all kinds of things. But I do know I got out in the lead fairly quickly and pulled out a fairly good lead, and was racing along, and Craig thought he had it in the bag, and quite frankly I probably did too. But it was I think it was I remember it being light out, so it had to be like an afternoon race.
Is this at Huron?
No, Aberdeen.
Aberdeen.
And the track started rubbering up, and I remember I was lapping Faggers, and I was having a heck of a time because he was going so good, because he was actually on the rubber and I wasn't. And I was like, dang, I couldn't get him. Finally I says, Gelling was just poking his nose underneath me, and I says, I got to get him, or the first one that gets him is going to be all right. And I drove into the corner so hard, and I drove right off the end of the racetrack. And oh my God! And Craig says, "What'd you do that for? There was no way he was going to get you." I didn't know that rubber was there, and that's a learned trait in itself, just to be able to see that rubber and find it first, because you can win a lot of races if you find that first. And it's contrary, it looks like black racetracks, but it'll dull. and even the spectators can watch and see that. And if you find that, it's just like racing on asphalt, and you can put every bit of horsepower down on the track, burns the tires off, but ain't nobody going to pass it to a single file. But I went off the track, came back on in fourth, right behind Jerry Radetsky. I think Gelling wound up winning the dang thing, and I think Mitch was second or something like that. And it's just, that race haunts me to this day. That it's why did you drive in that? You didn't have to do it. It was dumb, you tell yourself it was the dumbest thing you did, but it's one of them things that those are the kind of races that teach you big lessons, because when that rubber came ever more, boy, I can guarantee I didn't slip off of it anymore.
And there wasn't many 10,000 to win races then. I mean, that might have been the only one, wasn't it? Did Cedar Lake have one?
No, I don't think so. It was a 10,000. Well, at that time, I think later, and that Cedar Lake actually had their 50,000 or 30,000 to win show, but that was for the big touring guys. But for Wissota type cars, that was the big race of the year, no question about it. So did I ever win that one? No, that's one of the few that snuck away. And really, like you say, do the grind at you? That's the one, because there's not too many races that I didn't win, and that's one of them. So it's like, yeah, I'm a little frustrated.
Did they still have the race?
Yeah, I think they do.
It went away. It went away for a while because Terry Volz actually became, he was running with Soda. Yeah. And then when he actually became promoter again, there's part of a promoters group at the Brown County Speedway. Mm-hmm. And I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, they brought the Dakota Rumble back. Mm-hmm. So they changed the format a little bit, but they did bring that 10,000 to win race back. Turns out you're not the only guy that kind of gave one away on that. I think I've heard people running over lap cars, maybe Mitch or something like that. So yeah, that's a
I do
tough
remember
one.
That. Yeah,
I think
let's get a GoFundMe and get him out in the car. Let's give him one more shot at it.
There we go. We're gonna do a fans fund. Shout out to the folks at Cedar Lake Speedway, right, for doing their fans fund over there. Get a fans fund. Get Rick Egersdorf to Brown County.
Well, let's do this. Let's do like the senior golf league. Let's get Auckland, Mitch, me, Leon, and
that would sell out a grandstand right there. That would be absolutely incredible. That would be awesome. National scene, right? So Dirt Track World Championships. I know you went down there twice, I believe it was. Yep. And what are some other big races on the national scene that you were able to race at?
Well, we raced down in Odessa, Missouri. That was on a mile track, which is insane for those types of race cars. They were not built for that. The roll cages weren't, if you rolled over, man, there was going to be some problems. So that was one, Odessa, did I say Odessa? Yep. Yeah, Odessa, and then that was actually a half mile. Sedalia, Missouri was the mile track. That was the one that was bad, but Odessa was super fast too, because it was like banked 30 degrees. It was like Daytona, and hammer was down, and you looked up around the corner to make sure somebody wasn't there. Raced in Louisiana. That was one of the biggest surprises of my life. We went down to Boot Hill Speedway, which just had a race down there recently, and I couldn't believe how you had to get to this track. You had to get through the bayou almost to get to it. And then when you got there, it was racing around a football field. That's all the bigger it was. And it was just, oh my gosh, we went all the way down there for that. And I don't know, I made the race, I think, and didn't do well, because it's like, how are you going to pass Moyer one, I think. But anyways, that was one. And then Pennsboro, West Virginia Motor Speedway, we raced that one. That was an interesting deal, because we went down to Pennsboro, and West Virginia had rained out, and if you wanted to, you could race that race and start in Naconsi and work your way up. Well, I started dead last in Naconsi and won that, I think, what happened? Oh, I was just passing for the lead, and the rear end blew out of it. And so we didn't make that one, but man, that was a fast racetrack too in the old days of the high bank speedways. And then there was Kingsport that I didn't make, and then I raced at Eldora and went there twice as well. Made it once at Pennsboro. That was they called it the World Series of Dirt Track Racing, which then the Major League Baseball made them change that name. They couldn't use that name anymore. I mean, maybe they still do, or something changed, but they could not use that name anymore. And I remember making that race. Remember racing with Buck Simmons, coming up to him in the concert to make the show. And there's some, and then the motor blew, so I couldn't race. And at them days, you could sell your positions, and early on, but that year you couldn't, and you had to make at least a lap to get your money, and that's what we did. So.
Sell your position.
Yeah. You
well, how did that work?
Like if you were a back marker or somebody that, I shouldn't say back marker, but somebody that made one of them big monster shows that paid big money in the back, you could sell your position to somebody else.
Really?
So if you made that race, you could say, okay, let's just say the last place paid $1,000, which wasn't uncommon in them days for them big shows for them to do. And you wouldn't have a prayer in hell to win that. Somebody might come up and say, I'll give you $1,200 or $1,500 for that position, and we want to race that because we think we got a chance to make it, and you'd sell your position that way.
Do you think that would be better than what they do today? Like you see races now with these big shows, right? And they'll put like 30 cars in it because they have like 6 provisionals, 7 provisionals. Do you think it'd be better to go to the 24-car format and just be like, hey, if you want to sell your spot to this guy, do that?
Well, it would be interesting, but the problem is there's in the national touring, there's typically only 10 guys that do that.
Right.
Maybe Lucas has 12, 15 maybe because but anyways, those guys got to make money if they're going to follow that series, and that's why they do it. I understand why they do it, but when sometimes I think you should only get 3 a year or something.
Right.
Having the provisional be there every week, that's not fair because there's
Right.
a lot of guys that come to those races trying to make them legit, and you can't. And all they want to do is have a shot at it, and they don't get that shot because of all the provisionals. So I'm not a big fan of the provisional, but I understand why they do it.
For sure. Speaking of the national scene, Gopher 50, 1991. Part of the Hell Tour at that time, parked in Victory Lane down in Owatonna.
Yeah, that race was one of them races I just couldn't win. And I know 2 years earlier than that, I led 48 of the 50 laps, had a flat tire at the end. I know there was another time where I ran out of gas running in the top 3 because of the yellow flags, and we ran alcohol, and that's what we did in them days. But in 91, my first year with Craig Geller, I won the Gopher. And everybody says, oh, you didn't win it. Freddie Smith lost it because he was light. Well, he was 20, 30 pounds light. And if you're 25, 30 pounds light in a late model in them days, that was like, 300 horsepower. Not really, but, we all had the same deal. He chose not to fuel, and he didn't, and I won. So that's how you look at it. So the way I look at it, there was enough of them taken away from me. I won that one, maybe not the way I wanted to, but I won it. So
you're not going to give the trophy
I'm
back.
not giving it back.
You're going to keep that for sure. My pit guy said, you got to bring this up. How did he feel about beating Ryan Aho at the Tony Stewart night? I'm like, really? He's like, well, I still don't think he beat you. I did see pictures, by the way. It looks like he beat me by about that much. But that was a fun night. That was a big crowd there at that Tony Stewart night.
When they brought those NASCAR guys in, and I still can't believe how much those guys drew. They had Earnhardt, which didn't even race one time, and they had to set up extra bleachers, which they did. Tony Stewart was there. Again, in that era, people just crawled out of the woodwork to go see that. Get back to the race. I remember that you were racing up there, and I thought that was I was a pretty good late model racer at the time. You were kind of new, exactly. Yeah. And I says, holy smokes, Ryan is doing really well. I got to figure out how to get him because you can't let one of these newbies beat you,
especially from out of town, right?
And I remember that was really close race too, but of course. My view of that finish was a little different than yours. So.
Yeah, the trophy's right over there. It's a little bit bigger than my second place trophy, but that's actually the highlight of my racing career was getting second in that race. I only ran late models for a little bit, so getting second to you, it felt like a win to me. I'm like, I won. I lost to Rick Egersdorf at Cedar Lake. I won, and so that was a great memory for me. So I don't know if you're going to want to talk about this story or not. I wish he was here because I tried to pry it out of him. You said Slammer is called Slammer for a reason. I was too little to remember what happened, okay? And it's been bugging me and eating at me for years and years and years. What happened at the Labor Day shootout with Slammer?
I was actually there, and maybe my memory isn't 100% clear on exactly what happened, but I know that the officials decided that Slammer should go to the back of the pack. And
right call or wrong call?
I don't remember. That's the part I don't remember. In Slammer's eyes, it wasn't. I don't think because he wouldn't have done what he did. But anyways, they sent him back, and or they wanted to send him back. He wouldn't go there. He wouldn't go there. And then the wrecker came up to try to pull him off the track, and tried to hook it up, and then he backed up, and then the wrecker would move, and then he'd back up and move, and then he'd drive in front. So then finally, I think one of the pit stewards, don't know who it was, but decided that they were going to jump on top of his car and pull off the magneto wire, or a spark plug wire.
Right.
You know, that's a little hard to do because they're all screwed in there. But he was up on the hood trying to grab at that, and Slammer decided to give him a ride of his life. So he took him around the speedway, and then all of a sudden, in them days, they had at least one cop there, and then a cop was chasing him down, and finally,
on the track?
I don't know, not cop there. Not like Barney Fife and Andy were chasing him around, but it was almost as hilarious. But that guy went for a ride of his life, and then Slammer, I think, cooled down somehow and stopped. And I threw Slammer in the back of the cop car and I'm going to take him to jail or whatever. And they kicked him out for a few years, so he couldn't race there. I know that. And that's actually how he got his name Slammer.
Because he went to the Slammer.
Yeah, people don't know that, but John Jones was a millionaire that used to race with us in them days, and he had the prettiest, best of everything. Orange, by the way.
Yep.
And anyways, the cops had him back in the corner of the speedway, and they were going to take him to jail and throw him in jail. And John Jones went over there and talked to the cop and says, "I'll bail him out. What is it going to take, or whatever, you know." Whatever. I don't think they ever took Slammer to the, because I was there. They didn't take him to the Slammer, but John Jones actually gave him the name Slammer because they were going to take him to the Slammer. Now, Slammer earned the name Slammer on the racetrack, but that isn't where he got his name.
Nice.
John Jones gave him that name of Slammer because they were going to take him to the Slammer if John Jones didn't talk the cop out of it and just said, cooler heads are prevailing now, just let him go back to his trailer and go home. And that's when my brother used to do a lot of traveling too. And,
right.
And he did travel all over the country, or Midwest as well at that point. So he was kind of a big name at that point. And won a lot of races. So yeah, that's how he got his name, and that's the story. That's not one thing you can't be proud of, but it is a heck of a story.
It's part of the racing lore, right? Another racing lore that I have, and this is folklore up in Hibbing, Labor Day shootout. The story goes, Rick Egersdorf's leading the Labor Day shootout. They used to stop the cars on the front straightaway when there's a yellow, red, you know.
Yeah.
and the story that I heard was, you called over Don Hankey, said, "Don, I got to take a leak," and you got out of your car. Is there some truth to this?
There is absolutely truth to that.
Well, I got to hear this story. What happened?
What happened is, you know, I think it was an afternoon race, and it might have been one of them rare Hibbing weekends when it was super hot. And of course, you know, you have to hydrate before you go out in a race. And they kept having these red flags, and you'd sit there, and I was just like swimming. I had to go to the bathroom so bad. And you got these seat belts on, they're pushing on your bladder, and it's like I couldn't take it anymore. So like you said, I said, are we in a red flag? Can I get out of my car? He said, red flag? You can. He said, I got to the leak. So I got out of my car, ran underneath the flag stand, underneath the grandstand. It was all dirt under there, so it didn't matter. Took a leak, got back in my car, put my helmet back on, and won the race.
That is, I wanted to hear that from the horse's mouth because I've heard that for years and years. Hankey told that story. I'm like, I can't even picture that in my mind. I don't remember it. I guarantee I was there, but that's good stuff right there. Your better half over there mentioned a little something about a story with Lance Matthews.
Oh, boy.
Whoops.
See, you opened your mouth. Now you got to come tell it.
Yeah, we better get your better half. See, we gotta get this one.
Come on over here, Bridget.
We got to get it verbatim because
we'll get Bridget over.
memory's kind of bad over here.
So we got a little story here about, you know, your involvement with racing, and we were talking about rivalries, and somehow or another you mentioned Lance Matthews.
Yeah.
What happened there?
So I came on to the circuit much later, but I was on an airplane, and I was wearing his race sweatshirt and sit down in my seat, and this lady next to me kind of leans over and says, "Oh, racing. Who's on your sweatshirt?" And I just said, "Rick Egersdorf. Do you know him?" And she looked at me and she said, "Yeah, he punched my brother." And then the captain comes on and says, everyone take your seats, buckle up, and now I'm stuck on an airplane for 3 hours sitting next to this woman. I can't escape. And boy, did he get a phone call after that one, because I had no idea. So
I got it. So what happened here? Now Lance, I mean, and I like Lance, but Lance is always, you know, he wasn't afraid to kind of throw a hip check here and there.
No, that is true. As I mentioned earlier, Lance and my brother and a couple other guys could manhandle cars that didn't work, and sometimes they tried way more than they should have, and take people out or whatever else, and I felt they took me out at one race down at Menominee one time, so me and my brother went down and had a little talking to Lance, and there was a big brawl. I mean, it was a mess, and I think there was even moms involved and scratching and whatever else going on, and it's just like it all worked out, and everybody just, you know, I mean, you know how officials are and people, they break it up really quick, and probably lasted about 2 seconds and 2 punches or something or whatever else, but it was an incident. It was a big deal, and it took a long time before we could talk to Lance, you know, and he's a great guy now. I mean, he's, you know, everybody gets along eventually.
And that was way more common then, right? I mean, it was, I remember even at our tracks up north, there'd be a brawl, people be in a fist fight, and literally the next week they'd all be drinking beer together after the races. It just, you know, let's get it done, let's get it over, let's move on. And
that's exactly it too. Like you say, it was that night, and you had a little pushing and shoving contest, and you know, tempers flared a little bit, and it was over. You know, and then like you say, you went and had them little picnic things afterwards. You know.
Sometimes that's better, right? It's a lot better than it festering all year long. Just let's get it done right now. But if you're the big guy, it's even better for you.
Well, it helped, you know.
That's why I had big pitmen.
Yeah.
Really big, really big pitmen.
Yeah, Casey, and we got into it with Dino a few times too. And when we saw Casey there, we said, maybe it wasn't that big a deal.
Somebody come over,
back the other way.
Right?
Let me come over, wanted to borrow the floor jack, and I looked at him and I says, with these two guys, I don't need a floor jack. They just lift the car up themselves.
Right.
Denny
Simon,
he's a big guy, boy. See, I remember those guys when they're bigger than you and can take you out. You remember them.
For sure. So you mentioned, we asked, you know, what are some of the memories you had? That was one of them, right? That was a Lance memory.
yes.
But you remember a crash that he had, right?
I do remember a crash he had, but I actually have to add this too. The first night I ever met him, 17 years ago, and we were having coffee, and he was telling me, because I knew nothing about racing, and we're just sitting down having a great conversation, and he told me, well, yeah, I race cars. And I said, with the action, oh, what's that? You take a left? And he said, well, yes, it is. Had no clue. And it was about a month later, and one of my coworkers, she said, check out the internet. He's all over the internet. And I'm like,
that was when it just started.
And I thought, oh, was that stupid to do? I had no clue, but yeah, so.
Yeah, he's kind of a big deal.
I guess he was, so yeah.
She's like, I'm with a celebrity. I got a celebrity here.
So you asked me about a flip or something, or one of the most memorable races. I did see him flip. Did not like that night at all, and I was by the pit entrance, and there's the fence, and I'm just holding onto the fence, and I'm just watching, and I'm waiting for him to get out, and I'm waiting for him to get out, and I'm waiting, and I'm just, nothing's happening, and I'm just standing there, and then this guy comes up behind me, and he's like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm waiting for Rick to get out of the car. And he looks at me, and he taps me, and he said, I'm right here. And I'm like, no, I'm, you know, and it took me a little bit, because it's a little scary when you have someone, you know, who...
It wasn't my worst flip, we'll just say that. It was a pretty calm one, but
now,
still.
you called it a twirl, but still, that wasn't enough for me, but...
What was your worst flip? What was your worst wreck?
Aberdeen, South Dakota. Went out there, and this was like it was the 80s actually. 80, it was when I was racing for Bob Osterman, so it had to be about 86, 87, and we were pretty fast at that point. And it was one of them deals where we didn't get no special draw, I can guarantee you that, because we started in the back. And I was going along in this car. I can still remember it was M1. Don't know who drove it, but he came from the top groove down to the bottom and hit my right rear tire as we were just coming out of the corner. speed was up at that time, and that was when you had these real rigid front ends, and they were just complete knives almost. And what happened was that car lifted up the back end, the front end grabbed and dug in, and it just did a like this and flipped. And I remember I was up in the air and hitting a few times, and I could actually hear the announcer counting my flips. I can't remember how many it was, but it was like 1, 2, 3.
Really?
And it's for seeing, because everything kind of goes quiet, and you could hear that. And that was the worst one, because that was my best race car too. That was the one I won a lot of, 32 features in one season on, and that was the end of that. And you do have good cars and bad cars in racing, and that was a good one. And that was we knew that we had a good one, and that was the end of it because it was just junk.
You mentioned lights out, right? Your lights went out, but you mentioned that there was a time at the racetrack when the lights went out at the Cedar Lake Speedway.
Crazy, yeah.
That was.
Why don't you tell the story? Because you were
It was. When was it, dear?
It was a Thursday night, I remember, because it was a school night, and
it must have been a special or something.
Yeah.
But what happened? We were out on the racetrack and we were racing, and all of a sudden they had some kind of electrical. I don't know. Dinah was doing some work up there.
Yeah.
No, but
they let me in free to put in a fuse. I don't know.
But anyways, the lights. We were at full racing speed in the dark at night, and the lights went completely out, and it's like, oh my God, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And you just, you just held on the gas for just a few seconds and hoping they'd come back on. They didn't come back on, so you just kind of eased it into the bottom of the track, and no one got hurt, no one crashed.
Wow.
And that was unbelievable. And then they figured out what was wrong with the lights. But I mean, I can remember racing at Stillwater Speedway when the generator went out, and they put cars out on the corners with their headlights on, and we racing that.
Remember the lights going bright and dark and bright and dark?
Really?
Yeah, at Stillwater, yeah. Because the generator would start to run out of gas or something.
It's like, okay, first of all, we didn't have good lighting, and then second of all, you had now you got 7mm, 5mm tear-offs. These things were thick plastic things, and you'd polish them and you'd throw them off, and if you were smart, you had this little clip on the back of your head because you didn't have a headrest either. You flip these things off, and they'd be like a dozen of them hanging on the back of your head still that you'd wash, and
really?
They were like a piece of elastic around a deal that went on your goggles, and you just grab them and flip them off, grab them, flip them off, and you'd find them in your back of your car or whatever. And I think we raced more by braille than we did actually seeing what.
You go to Joanne Fabrics or something and get that elastic, and then you use safety pins to hold on to those things.
Yep.
And you pull them down and throw them back.
So, I mean, I think we lost half the audience here on tear-offs, right? So tear-offs is when they used to actually water the racetrack.
Oh, yeah, they did that.
That might not be a thing anymore, right? So you had to peel them off. But, I mean, what a different era. I mean, and it was more exciting, right? I mean, that was just more entertaining in general. Mm-hmm. That is crazy that you guys had tear-offs like that. I would love to see. So if somebody has something like that, I would love to see it.
The thick padded leather masks.
I brought mine. Went to the state fair. Went to when they used to have that history thing. Yep. And that's where it ended up. I don't know where it is now because they got.
That was too bad. Just for yours went. Yep. Okay, wow, yeah, that was exciting.
So traveling, right? I can think back. I had some haulers, right? That like, I'll be honest, they did not belong on the road. I'm probably responsible for DOTs picking on race cars. You had an iconic hauler. I remember as a kid when that Able towing hauler pulled into the racetrack. You're like, that's a professional race car driver pulling in right here. And Mitch Johnson had one. So some of that stuff was pretty cool. But any stories that you have during traveling, you're like, I can't believe this happened, or.
Well, just in that hauler alone, and there's a little story in the sense that my brother Slammer, it isn't like we just, had a sponsorship that gave us the money for that. We built that thing from the ground up.
Oh, you did?
No, I'm sorry. What he did was with that particular hauler, he bought an old potato chip truck. Yeah, and it was a super deal, so we bought it and we converted it and made it into that hauler.
Okay.
And then, Slammer's a good mechanic. He put the rest of it together, but that's how that hauler came into being or whatever. And it held two cars instead of having the stacker that they have today where they put that at the top and drive them both in. These were both, on the bottom. And then we'd had to open up our compartments underneath that, they certainly up that ante in the new modern versions that are probably a couple $100,000 a piece.
All of that.
I don't think Slimer had 30 grand in that whole thing. You couldn't build the regular trailer for what he had into that. So, but it was intimidation too. It kind of helped. Like you said,
sure.
Oh my God, this guy's coming.
Yeah, there's no question about that. When that hauler pulled in, like everybody's eyes focused on that, and they're like, "Uh-oh, we're in trouble." That's just the way it was. Your daughter also mentioned bounties. Did you have some bounties on you back in the day?
I remember Nesbitt having a bounty on him, and I sort of read that, and I thought I did too, and I just can't remember if I did or not. I would have, looking at it and seeing how many I won in a row at a couple of racetracks, I would have thought there was, and I think there was on me, and I think Lanfeard actually won the dang thing, and I know he won the one bounty that was on Nesbitt, because I saw that in my notes. But I can't answer that question. I don't know. I don't remember.
So if somebody remembers, if there was ever a bounty, there probably should have been.
Oh,
if there wasn't, there should have been one on you. But if somebody remembers a story on that, go ahead. I would love to
hear it too, because there might have been.
So any hauler crashes, flat tires, any things that you're like, we probably shouldn't have been?
Oh, there was one time we were in that very hauler that you're talking about. We were heading down to Brownstown, Indiana. And I didn't drive it much, but I did have my Class A license just in case those guys ever got too weary. But we were doing a lot of racing, and we're driving down the road. And it must have been in the fall or early spring. We're driving down the road, and I didn't drive them things much. And I know sometimes Lambert didn't have the best of equipment. It might have been a little sloppy because she was a quite used vehicle. We're driving down the road, and they're all sleeping. I'm going, "Damn, there's something wrong here," because I'm turning the wheel and nothing was happening. I said, "Wake up, Slam! There's something wrong here." And I knew just keep the speed going because nothing was happening. And I told him what's happening. He says, "Slow down, real easy. You're on black ice." And I was turning my wheel like this, and it wasn't doing anything. We were just going down the road, and we got slowed down and off to the side. He got my ass out of that seat real quick, and he drove the rest of the way. But it's like, that was a spooky deal.
Right.
But this tells you something about Rick when he says he's got a CDL in case they get too weary. That's being really nice.
Yeah, that's a story for another day. We don't need to get
we call that weary, I guess.
But there is another story that I do tell that a lot of people haven't heard. But, in the early, we'll say the early Geller and Bob Osterman days, those guys knew how to party. I mean, they would
get really weary.
Well, they would get really weary. But anyways, the story, them guys would have a case of vodka for the whole weekend and then be gone at the end of the week. Granted, they didn't drink it all themselves. They had a lot of people helping them, but there was one time we were heading off to, I think, South Dakota again, and it was in the morning, and Bob, I think, was in the passenger seat. No, he was in the driver's seat, and Geller was riding along, and we're in the red box. And I'm sitting in the back, as I always was, trying to get some shut-eye or whatever. And all of a sudden, I think Bob or Craig says, "Let's have a drink." And, let's skip that mix. Let's just go right to the bus. So they had a bottle of vodka, and they're passing it amongst each other. And this was fairly into my relationship with the two of them. And I'm going, "Oh my God, these guys are going to get smashed before we even get a racetrack. I don't know if they're going to be able to tighten my lug nuts. I won't be sure of anything." And I'm going, "Oh my God, what are these guys doing?" And I was trying to think, should I say something? And I said, I got it. "What are you guys doing?" And then I started laughing like crazy. They put water in a jug of vodka, and because they were drank so much that they were pulling a joke on me. They were drinking this water like we were going down the road, and it's like, oh my gosh. I was so relieved after, and I made sure it was water too. So yeah, and I always say, those guys drank so much in my pit crew and stuff. I said, you know what? If my pit crew didn't drink so much every night of our racing career, I just wonder how many of the races I really would have won if them guys weren't so smashed.
But they had a lot of fun.
They had a lot of fun.
One of the biggest parties back in the day, Red Clay Classic, right? I mean, that was a party. But I have a different story. Actually, one of the promoters over at the ABC Raceway shot me over this. He said, "I recall a time where Rick got a he felt an unfavorable call.
No, there was probably then.
And next thing you know, you pull off the track, and on the next yellow, there's a hauler on the what happened there?
That was Craig. You know, sometimes he'd get myself, like I told you earlier, when I was at a racetrack, my idea there was to win at all costs, no matter what, and not stop till that checkered flag went. Okay, well, we got a bad call. Can't remember what it was. Spun out or something, got sent to the back or whatever, but Craig didn't like that call, figured that we didn't have a chance, which we probably did, but Craig didn't feel that way, and loaded up, and there was a race going on, and as soon as there was a yellow flag, we parked back in the corner there, and we drove right on the racetrack, right around with the hauler, and out the door we went. We didn't finish the race, so yeah, that was Craig's deal, and it's like, damn, because as a racer, you just want to race no matter what.
Right. Eric said, I was not happy at the time, but I look back at it, he goes, it's kind of funny.
The fans were going nuts. That's another one of them deals where, what's he doing? And they didn't know, and then they knew I had at least in my mind, I had a bad call, so there's like, that's showing them or whatever. It didn't show nobody, but it was a story, that's for sure.
Nesbitt had a few of them moments.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any favorite? I mean, everybody's got to tell a Nesbitt story. Do you have a favorite Nesbitt story? There's so many, but I mean, the guy's legendary, Hall of Famer, great racing career. But there was, I mean, you want to talk about passionate?
Oh, yeah.
That's the guy. I'll use that word for Tom.
Yeah, well, like I said, he would. You know, if you got in his bad graces, you were going to get his chewing out or whatever. He never would swing a punch, but he chewed the heck out of you where you didn't want to hear it. But I don't,
What about pit meetings?
Oh yeah, he always very, very vocal at them, and when the rules were such, and he'd have his say. You know, there's no question about that.
What do you miss most about it?
Well, everybody wants to say the people, but it's just the competition and the adrenaline rush. You know,
right.
You know, that was unbelievable. I was able to do that for so many years. I didn't have to take drugs or anything. That was it, man. And so that was my high every week. I worked a pretty high, stressful job in my career, and I always looked forward so much to the weekend, because that was my release. I completely forgot about work, and could just get that all off of my brain, where a lot of people, can't do that, and work stresses them out. So it was a stress reliever, this racing thing.
Sometimes. Sometimes. And let's end with this, what next?
Oh, geez. Got to shoot par.
Got to shoot par. So a little bit of golfing now, I saw in the shop, right, or in the garage. You built yourself a little, was it a driving range?
It's they call a simulator, and you can hit golf balls in there, and it tracks them, tells you if you got a slice, a fade, if you hit it a long ways or not, and so about a month ago, I said, you know what, they got to have something to do in the winter time, and as a competitor, I want to go out there and I want to be able to not just have a good time. I want to have a good time, but I want to win too.
It never changes. It never goes away.
So I got it just to get figure out a few things, so where maybe I can swing the club a little better, get the ball out there a little further, and it's fun. It's surprising how I never was a big video game person, right? And Bridget says, well, you never were, but you got the biggest one you can possibly buy now. It's a big video game is what it is, because it's so real life and you can get immersed in it.
Right.
It's unbelievable, that your brain just, you hit a bad shot on the screen and it tells you, and it's like, oh, crap. It's like, really? You're that immersed in. So I can see why these kids are involved in it.
Right.
Hence probably a little problem of getting those off the couch and into the garage,
Right. So maybe what we need to do, right, is we need to get some of us old racers together, right, people that have raced, and have like a little 4-person scramble, or have some kind of little golf outing with some past racers. Dino, if you don't play golf, you can always come hang out, and you can be our
I'll
caddy.
drive the golf cart. I'm really good at that.
Right.
I'm an excellent driver.
Yeah, definitely an excellent driver. Right? Well, I tell you what, it's been a pleasure, man. Anything you want to add? Anything else that you?
No, just I got to shout out to Joe Jensen, and his passing, and that it's sad that life is so short, and my brother.
Right. A lot of people helped along the way, that's for sure. And that's one thing we look back at. And there's so many people we did build relationships with that we had, you had a fantastic career, but there was a lot of people behind the scenes and obviously pretty darn close to a few of them.
Yeah, I gotta mention the other two too. Is Bob Osterman gave his, shirt off his back, and Craig too. Those four guys, unbelievable.
Right.
And don't forget to mention how well deserved this is, that he's going into the Hall of Fame. That's kind of what this was all about, right?
Yeah, and that's where we started. And
it is so cool to have such a local guy,
right?
One of our guys, one of our, to get into that. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely, and we should end there. I mean, that's going to be cool, right? You go down to the North-South 100. You've never been to Florence, so that's. Is that September? Is that right after?
No, it's right August, right after the USA Nationals. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great race, by the way. Like that, you'll enjoy that race. That's a fun race, but to be able to be part of the National Dirt Late Model Hall of Fame, right? What is that? When you got that phone call, what went through your mind?
Well, it's sort of emotional in the sense that the whole community, in our area, that raced against me or whatever else is all part of that, and it's just really special too that I'm the second one in Minnesota.
Right.
Willie Kraft is the only other one. There's probably only 2 or 3 in Wisconsin. Parker, Mars, and I don't know if there's another one or not. But that's a pretty rare thing, and to be selected is great.
Yeah, well deserved. Appreciate your time, and I look forward to getting on the golf course with you.
Good job.